The ultimatum, the holographic display, flickered to life in the command center of Titan's Rest, casting blue light across Captain Miravex's tired features. She'd been awake for 36 hours, overseeing the evacuation drills that nobody truly believed would matter. When the seal of the Krathian Empire materialized before her, she felt her stomach drop. Human settlement designated Titan's Rest. The voice boomed through the speakers, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. You have violated the territorial sovereignty of the Krathian Empire. Your expansion into the outer colonies is an affront to galactic order. The image of Warlord Tavron appeared, his chitinous armor gleaming like polished obsidian, 4 arms crossed in a gesture of absolute authority. You have 72 hours to evacuate or be eliminated. This is your only warning. The transmission ended, leaving only silence and the soft hum of the station's life support. Mira's fingers tightened on the edge of the console until her knuckles went white. Behind her, Lieutenant James Hale stepped closer, his presence a familiar comfort in the sudden chaos. "Captain." His voice was steady, but she heard the tremor beneath it. They'd served together for 5 years, survived the Belt Wars, watched friends die in the cold vacuum. She knew every inflection of his voice, every expression he wore. Right now, he was trying to be strong for her. "Sound the alert," Mira said quietly. "All personnel to battle stations. Begin evacuating non-essential civilians immediately." She turned to face him, seeing the question in his dark eyes. "We're not leaving, James." "Mira." He caught himself, glancing at the other officers scrambling around the command deck. They couldn't afford informality now. "Captain, we have 3,000 people on this station. The fleet won't arrive for at least a week. Those cruisers they sent could vaporize us in minutes." She moved closer to him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. The scent of recycled air and his familiar cologne mixed together, reminding her of stolen moments in the observation deck when the war felt far away. "If we run from Titan's Rest, we'll run from the next colony." "And the next? Where does it end?" Her hand found his, a brief touch hidden behind the console. "Humanity has always been told we don't belong out here, that we're too fragile, too reckless. Maybe it's time we show them what happens when you corner a species that crawled out of hell itself." James squeezed her hand once before releasing it, understanding flooding his features. "The defensive platforms are operational. We've got enough firepower to make them bleed." "Good." Mira pulled up the tactical display, examining the 3 Krathian cruisers holding position at the edge of the system. They looked like predators circling prey, beautiful and terrifying. "Get me a line to Earth Command." "And James?" She met his eyes, letting herself be vulnerable for just a moment. "If this goes wrong, it won't," he interrupted, his jaw set with determination. "We've faced worse odds. Remember Callisto?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You mean when you disobeyed orders and pulled my squad out of that ambush?" "I prefer to call it creative tactical interpretation." His attempt at humor fell flat in the gravity of the moment, but she appreciated it anyway. The station shuddered as the defensive platforms powered up, weapon systems coming online with a thrumming that resonated through the deck plates. Throughout Titan's Rest, families were being hurried onto transport ships, children crying, parents clutching hastily packed belongings. The colony they'd built over 15 years, the lives they'd carved from rock and ice, all of it hanging by a thread. Mira watched the tactical display as their small defensive fleet assembled. 5 frigates and a handful of patrol craft against an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. On paper, it was suicide. But humanity hadn't survived Earth by following what was written on paper. "All stations report ready, Captain," an officer called out. Mira straightened, pushing aside fear and doubt. She'd been raised in the storms of Jupiter's moon, had learned to fly in gravity fields that crushed other species, had watched her father die defending a mining rig from pirates. Earth had made humans into survivors. Now they'd see what survivors could become. "Send a message to Warlord Tavron," she ordered, her voice carrying across the command center. Every eye turned to her, waiting. "Tell him Titan's Rest declines his ultimatum. This colony stands, and if he wants it, he'll have to come through us." James moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "For the record," he murmured, "I've wanted to tell you something, in case we don't get another chance." She didn't look at him, couldn't afford to, not with every officer watching, but her voice softened. "Tell me after we win, Lieutenant. Give us both something to survive for." The tactical display showed the Krathian cruisers beginning their approach, weapons charging with light that promised death, In 72 hours, they'd be in firing range. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn what happened when you threatened a species that refused to die quietly. Miravex smiled, cold and dangerous. Let's show them what Deathworlders really are. First blood. The frozen surface of Arcturus Minor glittered under 3 distant moons, beautiful and merciless. Sergeant Nina Cross crouched behind a ridge of ice-covered rock, her breath forming clouds in the thin atmosphere. Through her helmet's display, she counted the enemy forces, her enhanced optics revealing what looked like certain death. 200 Krathian shock troops against her unit of 40 Marines. The odds would have made anyone else surrender. Nina felt her pulse quicken with something that wasn't quite fear, more like anticipation. Beside her, Private Owen Drake checked his rifle for the 3rd time, a nervous habit she'd noticed over their 6 months serving together. "Owen," she said softly over their private channel. His head turned toward her, and even through the helmet she could imagine his green eyes, always so earnest. "Stay close to me out there." "Always do, Sergeant." There was something in his voice, a warmth that had nothing to do with their heated suits. They'd grown closer during the long nights on patrol, sharing stories about Earth, about families they'd left behind, about dreams they'd had before the war found them. The Krathian commander, Zephan, broadcast across all frequencies. "Humans, you fight for a colony already lost. Surrender and you will be granted swift execution rather than suffering." His translator gave his words a mechanical edge, but the contempt bled through clearly. Nina switched to her unit's channel. "You all heard that garbage. They think we're going to roll over because they've got bigger guns." She checked her ammunition count. 2 magazines left, some grenades, and a combat knife that had been her grandmother's. "Here's what they don't know about humans. We don't quit. Not when it's hard, not when it's impossible. We're from a planet that's been trying to kill us since we climbed down from the trees, and we're still here." "What's the play, Sergeant?" Owen asked. Nina pulled up the tactical map, her mind racing through possibilities. The Krathian forces were advancing in a perfect formation, textbook military doctrine that probably hadn't changed in centuries. They expected humans to either run or mount a desperate defense. She smiled beneath her helmet. "We're going to use the mining tunnels," she said. "Split into 5 teams. Make them think we're everywhere at once. They want a battle. We'll give them a hunt." The Marines moved like shadows through the ice fields, disappearing into tunnel entrances that the Krathians hadn't even registered as tactical assets. Nina led her team through passages barely wide enough for their armor, Owen right behind her. In the tight darkness, she felt his hand brush against her shoulder, steadying her as they navigated a particularly narrow section. "Nina," he whispered, using her first name for the first time in months. "If we don't make it out, we'll make it," she cut him off, but reached back to squeeze his gloved hand. "But after this is over, you and I are going to have a real conversation. One that doesn't involve getting shot at. It's a date." They emerged behind the Krathian lines just as the enemy reached the ridge where Nina's unit had been moments before. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they found nothing but empty positions. Nina raised her fist, and 40 Marines opened fire simultaneously from a dozen different positions. The Krathians spun, trying to form defensive positions, but the humans were already moving. Nina's team placed charges on their supply carriers, detonating them in brilliant flashes that turned night into day. Owen dropped 3 enemy soldiers with precision shots before diving behind cover as return fire tore through the ice. "They're adapting," one of her Marines shouted. The Krathians were good, Nina had to admit. They began to organize, using their superior numbers to create overlapping fields of fire. "Fall back to Tunnel Delta," Nina ordered. Her people moved like water, flowing between cover, never staying still long enough to be pinned down. This was how humans fought, not with overwhelming force, but with stubborn creativity and a refusal to play by anyone else's rules. A plasma blast melted the rock next to her head, and Nina felt the heat even through her suit. She returned fire, dropping a Krathian officer. They were getting closer, tightening the noose. She needed something dramatic, something that would shake their confidence. "Owen, you still got that demo charge? The big one?" "Yeah, but..." "Good. We're going to bring down the entire ice shelf on their heads." She could hear the grin in his voice. "Now that's thinking like a Deathworlder." They set the charge at the base of a massive ice formation, timer set for 90 seconds. Nina grabbed Owen's arm and ran, her squad following as Krathian fire chased them through the tunnels. The explosion came like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Behind them, thousands of tons of ice collapsed, burying half the Krathian force and scattering the rest. When Nina emerged from the tunnels, she found Zephan himself standing amid the chaos. His armor cracked, 3 of his soldiers dead at his feet. He looked at her with what might have been respect or horror. "You fight without honor," he said. Nina pulled off her helmet, letting him see her face, her humanity. "We fight to survive. That's the only honor we need." The Krathian forces retreated, dragging their wounded, leaving behind equipment and their dead. Nina's Marines had lost 7, each one a name she'd carry forever. But they'd held the colony. 40 against 200, and they'd won. Owen approached as the adrenaline began to fade, removing his own helmet. His face was streaked with dirt and frost, but his smile was genuine. "That conversation you mentioned?" Nina laughed, surprised she still could after everything. "Yeah, let's have it." She pulled him close and for just a moment let herself be something other than a soldier. Let herself be human in all the ways that mattered. Above them, across the galaxy, reports of the battle were already spreading. Humanity had drawn first blood, and the stars would never look at them the same way again. The Death World Truth Doctor. Marcus Reed sat in the observation deck of the neutral station Harmony Point, studying data that made his scientific mind rebel against its own conclusions. For 3 weeks he'd been analyzing human physiology, human history, human psychology, trying to understand the species that had suddenly become the galaxy's most dangerous variable. Ambassador Thessia of the Quillarn stood beside him, her crystalline features reflecting the starlight. The Quillarn were observers, philosophers, a species that had avoided conflict for 10,000 years by understanding all others. Now she'd come seeking understanding of humanity, and what she was learning disturbed her deeply. "Show me Earth again," she requested, her voice like wind chimes. Marcus pulled up the holographic display. The blue and green planet rotated slowly, beautiful from a distance. "Looks peaceful, doesn't it?" He zoomed in, showing hurricane systems larger than continents. "Those storms. They generate winds that can tear apart reinforced structures. This hurricane here killed 20,000 humans in a single day, back in 2065. Thessia's bioluminescent patterns flickered with distress. "And they remained there?" "They rebuilt. That's what humans do." Marcus scrolled through images. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes splitting cities, tsunamis drowning coastlines. Earth has 5 major extinction events in its geological record. The planet itself is trying to kill everything on it, constantly. Tectonic activity, extreme weather, solar radiation. By any reasonable standard, Earth is classified as a Class 9 death world. No sapient species evolves on Class 9 worlds, Thessia said softly. They lack the stability required for complex civilization. Exactly. Humans aren't supposed to exist. Marcus brought up medical scans. Look at their physiology. They're persistence hunters. They can track prey for days without rest, regulating their body temperature through sweat. They heal from wounds that would kill most species. Their adrenal system allows them to temporarily ignore pain and injury during crisis. They're built for constant survival. The door to the observation deck opened, and Colonel Rachel Dorn entered, her uniform bearing the scars of a dozen campaigns. She was older than most active soldiers, 53 with gray threading through her dark hair. But she moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd survived when she shouldn't have. "Ambassador, Doctor," Rachel nodded to each. "You wanted to hear about human history?" Thessia turned her full attention to the colonel. "I need to understand why your species fights as you do. The Krathian Empire has conquered 400 worlds. They've never faced resistance like yours." Rachel moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. "How much do you know about Earth's past?" "Very little. Your species only achieved faster than light travel 30 years ago. Then let me educate you." Rachel's voice took on a storyteller's cadence, and Marcus recognized it as the way veterans shared their knowledge. "Before we touched the stars, humans spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. We had empires that spanned continents, conflicts that killed millions. We created weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came close to using them more than once." Thessia's patterns shifted to colors Marcus recognized as fear. "How did you survive?" "By learning when to fight and when to negotiate. By adapting faster than our circumstances could kill us." Rachel pulled up historical images. Ancient warriors with bronze swords, Medieval knights in armor, soldiers in trenches, pilots in cockpits. Every generation of humans has known war. It's in our stories, our art, our DNA. We don't glorify it, but we don't shy from it either. Marcus added his own data to the display. I've been studying human evolution. Did you know that humans are one of the few species that evolved as both prey and predator? Early humans were hunted by creatures with greater strength, speed, and natural weapons. But humans learned to work in groups, to use tools, to think strategically. They turned their weakness into strength. That's why you fight in ways that seem chaotic to the Empire, Theseus said, understanding dawning. You're not following military tradition. You're following survival instinct. Exactly, Rachel confirmed. She moved closer to the ambassador, and Marcus noticed something shift between them, a connection forming across the vast gulf of their different origins. Ambassador, your people have lived in peace for millennia. That's admirable, but humanity hasn't had that luxury. We've had to fight for every inch of progress, every generation of survival. When the Krathians declared war on us, they didn't declare war on soldiers. They declared war on a species that's been at war with extinction itself since we first stood upright. Theseus was quiet for a long moment, processing. I came here believing humanity was reckless, violent, dangerous. We are all those things, Rachel admitted. But we're also adaptable, compassionate, and stubborn as hell. The galaxy sees our capacity for violence and misses everything else. I don't, Theseus said softly, her patterns shifting to something warmer. I see a species that refuses to accept that the universe has already decided their fate. It's inspiring and terrifying. Marcus watched as Rachel smiled, a genuine expression that softened her warrior's face. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs. A little terror to shake up the established order. My people have remained neutral in galactic affairs for so long, Theseus said, almost to herself. But watching humanity fight, seeing what you're willing to sacrifice, I find myself questioning that neutrality. Rachel placed a hand on the ambassador's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended species barriers. You don't have to decide today, but if you ever do decide to choose a side, know that humans don't abandon our friends. The three of them stood together in the observation deck, looking out at a galaxy on the brink of transformation. Marcus thought about his data, about the patterns he'd found in human behavior. Humans learned from every failure, adapted to every challenge, and refused to accept defeat as final. The Krathian Empire thinks they're fighting another species, he said quietly. They don't realize they're fighting Earth itself. Every storm that shaped us, every predator that hunted us, every disaster we survived, it's all there in how we wage war. Then the Empire has already lost, Theseus said. They just don't know it yet. Rachel's comm unit beeped. She read the message, her expression hardening. Another colony under attack. 3 systems over. She looked at Theseus. Ambassador, I need to leave. But I'd like to continue this conversation when I return. I would like that as well, Colonel. Theseus' patterns pulsed with colors Marcus had never seen before. Emotions his instruments couldn't quite translate. After Rachel left, Theseus turned to Marcus. Doctor, I need you to send something to the Quillaran Council. Tell them everything you've learned about humanity. Tell them that we may be watching the rise of a species that will reshape the galaxy. You think they'll listen? I think they must. Because the alternative is standing aside while something extraordinary happens, and I refuse to let my people make that mistake. Marcus nodded and began composing his report. As he wrote, he kept coming back to one central truth. Humanity wasn't supposed to exist, but they did. They weren't supposed to survive Earth, but they had. And now they weren't supposed to stand against the Krathian Empire, but they were doing it anyway. The galaxy was learning what it meant to face a species that had never learned the word impossible. Apex Ascendant. The system of 3 suns burned with light that turned space itself into a cauldron of fire. Captain Mira Vex watched the tactical display as the largest fleet ever assembled by the Krathian Empire materialized from faster-than-light travel. Thousands of ships, more firepower than had been used in the last century of galactic warfare, all arrayed against the rebellion humanity had sparked. They brought everything, Lieutenant James Hale said quietly beside her. They'd survived 3 months since Titan's Rest, 3 months of desperate battles and narrow victories. Now they faced the Empire's final gamble. Good, Mira replied, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Let's end this. The Liberation fleet spread out to meet them, humans and their allies positioning themselves in the chaotic gravity wells created by the three stars. It was dangerous space, the kind that could tear apart ships if they miscalculated. But Mira had learned that humans excelled in dangerous spaces. Warlord Tavron's face appeared on every screen, his forearms spread in a gesture of dominance. Captain Vex, you've led the galaxy into chaos. Today order will be restored. Your allies will abandon you, and humanity will be erased from the stars. Funny thing about chaos, Tavron, Mira responded. It's where we do our best work. She cut the transmission and turned to James. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw everything they'd never had time to say reflected there. Every moment stolen between battles, every brush of hands in the corridor, every longing glance across the bridge. James, I need to tell you— I know, he interrupted gently. I've always known. And when this is over, when we're still standing, I'm going to take you somewhere far from any warship and tell you properly. Promise? On my life, the Empire attacked. Plasma cannons lit the void, energy weapons that could vaporize smaller ships in single hits. 3 human frigates died in the first minute, their crews sacrificing themselves to scatter the enemy formation. Mira felt each loss like a physical blow, but she couldn't afford to mourn. Not yet. All ships, execute pattern Maelstrom, she ordered. The Liberation fleet split apart, using the three suns' gravity to slingshot themselves in unpredictable patterns. Empire ships, larger and less maneuverable, struggled to track them. Kylox's Varn fighters darted between their lines, missiles finding weaknesses in formations that had been perfected over centuries. On the moon of Terminus 7, now a liberated world, Sergeant Nina Cross led ground forces in defending the orbital cannon that protected the planet. Krathian dropships attempted to land, but Nina's Marines had learned new tricks. They fought alongside freed slaves who knew every inch of their former prison, using the terrain to turn what should have been an easy Krathian victory into a nightmare. Aboard the Prometheus, Admiral Victor Kane coordinated the entire fleet while Specialist Cora Bennett maintained communications across the chaos. "Victor, the eastern flank is collapsing," she reported, her voice tight with stress. "Redirect the Quilarn vessels. Tell Ambassador Thessia we need her shields on that sector." Victor was everywhere at once, adapting to each new crisis, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Beside him, Cora worked miracles, keeping dozens of species working in harmony despite wildly different languages and command structures. The battle raged for hours, the space between the three suns becoming a graveyard of metal and dreams. But slowly, impossibly, the Empire began to falter. Every strategy they employed, humans and their allies countered. Every advantage they pressed, the Liberation fleet found a way to turn against them. Then Tavron played his final card. A massive flagship, larger than anything in the battle, emerged from faster-than-light travel. At its bow, a weapon charged with enough energy to destroy entire fleets. It rotated toward the heart of the human formation, toward Mira's command ship. "Evasive maneuvers!" James shouted, but they all knew it was futile. The weapon's targeting lock was absolute. If it fired, the war was over. Mira looked at her tactical display, calculating angles and distances, and understood what needed to be done. "James, take command." "What?" "No, Mira." She grabbed his face with both hands, kissing him with all the desperation and love she'd kept locked away. "Tell my family I fought well. Tell them I chose this." She released him and ran for the hangar bay, ignoring his shouts over the comm. 3 minutes later, Mira launched in a fighter with a full payload of antimatter missiles. She pushed her engines to maximum, racing toward the flagship as its weapon reached critical charge. Around her, other pilots saw what she was doing and formed up, adding their own sacrifice to hers. "All ships, this is Captain Vex. It's been an honor." She thought of James, of Earth, of every human who'd ever looked at the stars and dared to dream. For humanity. For everyone who was told they couldn't be free. For every species that deserves to choose their own fate. She flew directly into the weapon's barrel, triggering her missiles at the moment of impact. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems, a flash of light that destroyed the flagship's superweapon and crippled the vessel itself. But Mira's fighter, shielded by the weapon's own collapsing energy field, tumbled away damaged but intact. She was unconscious, her ship dead in space, drifting in the chaos of battle. "Someone get to her!" James screamed, abandoning his post to take a rescue ship himself. He dodged through debris and weapons fire, driven by something more primal than duty. The Empire, seeing their ultimate weapon destroyed, their flagship crippled, and their formations shattered, finally broke. Ships began retreating, then fleeing, until the entire fleet was in full rout. The Liberation forces, battered but victorious, watched them go. James found Mira's fighter and brought her aboard, his hands shaking as he checked her vitals. She was alive, barely, her body battered but breathing. He held her as medical teams swarmed around them, refusing to let go. 3 days later, Mira woke in the medical bay of Titan's Rest. The first thing she saw was James asleep in a chair beside her bed, his hand holding hers. The second thing she saw was the view through the window. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all flying flags of liberation. "We won," she whispered. James jolted awake, his eyes going wide. "Mira!" "Don't you ever—" He couldn't finish, pulling her into a careful embrace. "Don't you ever do that again." "The weapon destroyed." The Empire fleet scattered, rebellions erupting on every world they controlled. He pulled back to look at her. "You did it. We did it. The galaxy is free." In the weeks that followed, treaties were signed, new alliances formed, and the Krathian Empire dissolved into its component systems. Some chose peace, others chose isolation, but none chose war. Humanity, the species that shouldn't have existed, stood at the center of a transformed galaxy. Not as conquerors, but as the spark that ignited freedom across the stars. On Earth, where it all began, people looked up at the night sky knowing they'd earned their place among those distant lights. They were Deathworlders, apex predators forged by a planet that tried to kill them, and they'd taken those brutal lessons and used them to free a galaxy. Mira and James stood on the observation deck of Titan's Rest, watching the sunset over the colony that had refused to surrender. His arm was around her waist, her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in months, there was no battle to prepare for. "What now?" she asked. "Now?" James smiled. "Now we figure out what happens when Deathworlders decide to build instead of fight. I imagine it'll be just as impressive." Across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages, the same message spread. The humans had won. The predators from the Death World had become saviors. And the stars would never be the same. The war was over. The future was just beginning.